It's on now. Okay. Okay, so well, that's on now.
Oh, I see.
See what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
So.
Did I?
Okay, I'm going to ring the bell. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Russell Napier. I'm the keeper of the Library of Mistakes, and welcome. We've got some new visitors tonight, so let me explain what the Library of Mistakes is. It is a free public library, so it is your public library. We are open 9 to 5, Monday to Saturday. If you would like to come along, it's very easy. You go to our website, libraryofmistakes.com, register as a reader, so we know where you live, and then you can make an appointment to visit. And as I said, 9 to 5, Monday to Saturday. As well as being able to arrange a visit and come, you'll get invitations to these lectures. And there is also a podcast. And this is effectively a business and financial history library, but it's also fun, I think. You've come and find out. So amongst our regular guests or speaking events tonight, we've got something very special and something very different, something on happiness. And it's good to see so many Scots here to learn about happiness. How to measure it, how to promote it. So it's a great joy for me to be introducing my friend, Emma, who we have known each other for a very, very long time. Now, Pema, Deki, to talk about gross national happiness, and to introduce her and as the discussant, Rob Harley, portfolio manager at Stewart Investors, who knows a lot more about this subject than I do. So, Rob, Pema, over to you. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention one thing. The book. Yeah, well, your book is for sale at the end, and we'll also mention it, but I'm in the book. That's what I wanted to mention. So thank you. So I'm now enshrined for history as the pie-eating strategist, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you to the Library of Mistakes. Thank you to all of you, and a warm welcome. I hope that we enjoy the conversation that we're going to have this evening. I hope it brings us some happiness. I'm sure it will. A very special welcome to Emma Slade, our special guest this evening. Emma, I'm sure you want to say hello.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much for coming this evening. And I'm really looking forward to us discussing and learning and talking together. So I know it looks like him and me, but I really hope it feels like all of us. And I think we're going to be pretty liberal with our question policy, aren't we? So, yeah, you can pitch in. Yeah.
We are. So we're talking this evening about gross national happiness and the experience of Bhutan. And we'll touch on other ideas of holistic development as well as we go. We're not really entirely sure what exact path this conversation will follow. But as Emma said, that's okay. As Emma said, we want it to be a free-flowing conversation. So chime in whenever you want. Maybe just stick your hand in the air and catch my attention. And we'll do our best to bring everyone into the conversation as we go along. Before I briefly introduce Emma, I want to say something important, which is not something I do very often. But it's the existence and the influence of the greatest traits and qualities of humanity: kindness, happiness, love, empathy, patience, compassion. We could go on. All these very important things do not disprove the existence and influence of one of the greatest contrivances or inventions of humanity, which is money. Okay?
Can you just say that again? Sorry, Rob. Just say that
All
again.
the wonderful things that we love about humanity don't disprove the existence and the importance of money.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying this is because the project...
I see the link now. I see
the
it coming
project
up.
at the heart of Emma's work, one of the big projects at the heart of her work now, is her charity, Opening Your Heart to Bhutan. Some of you may have the little flyer. And it's a tremendous charity. It's funded by the sales of your book, Set Free, and by donations. It's an incredible charity that supports children with special needs in the eastern areas of Bhutan.
All over Bhutan.
All over.
Don't limit me to the east.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, all over Bhutan, yeah.
And it's a truly altruistic charity where practically every penny of every pound that we give goes to work on the ground supporting the children. I think you have one employee.
One employee, yeah.
And it isn't you.
And it isn't me, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the value of what we give tonight through the book sales or through donations or through donations that we may make after tonight is incredible. And hopefully Emma will go away not just feeling she's met lovely people and that we've had a great conversation, but that the charity has benefited as well. Okay, so that's the little commercial plug, which is very important.
So money is important.
Yeah, and the wise management of it, you know. So I run my charity in a kind of extremely efficient fashion because the power of £10 in Bhutan, if you use it well, can be quite amazing. So, you know, you can be loose and silly with money, or it can make a huge contribution and change people's lives.
Great. I'm going to say very little about Emma, just a few key points, and then I'm going to let her fill in some of the very important details that come between those key points. You were born in Kent and educated there as a young person. Then you went to Cambridge and then the University of London. and you studied fine art, is that right? And got a first-class degree. Emma found her way into the world of finance, working for a major bank, New York, London, Hong Kong. Was it debt finance?
Yeah,
Debt
emerging market
finance,
debt,
emerging market
the most
debt.
exciting part of debt, because it can be. Yeah.
Now we're going to jump ahead. Years later, you're studying yoga, you're traveling to Bhutan, and you eventually go on to become the first and only Western woman to be ordained as a Buddhist nun
In Bhutan,
in Bhutan.
not in the world.
In Bhutan.
My ambition is only Bhutan. I left the world to other people. Yeah.
And there's a huge, important, life-changing thing that happened in between,
Oh, yeah.
which you tell the story of in your book.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you like to tell us briefly why you wrote the book and what that life-changing thing was?
Ah, okay, yeah. So I wrote the book purely for the charity because, you know, when your heart is touched by something and you really are compelled to help that situation, you kind of look around and you think, what have I got that I can use to make people aware of this situation? And you know, especially Bhutan, not many people have been to Bhutan. You know, a lot of people can't know where it is even on a map, right? So the book was written to make people aware of the charity, etc., etc. And so, you know, as Rob has indicated, and as Russell knows very, very, very well, and many of you may have read the book already, etc., I had the interesting experience of being held at gunpoint in a hotel room in Indonesia, in Jakarta, on a business trip, which is not something I expected to happen, and I don't recommend as a sort of method to rethinking your life plan, you know. And so you can imagine, I think, you know, if you have a gun to your head, you think a lot about what you might have done, what you might want to do if you get to survive. And so that was a very key point, and I'm not sure how much I emphasize it in the book, but, you know, I felt this enormous sorrow that I was leaving the world, having sort of been selfish, to be honest, at that point. And I felt this huge missed opportunity to have been better and kinder and bigger than I had been. And so, you know, when I did survive and I recovered enough, you know, I definitely went on this very different journey. Because I knew that when you're leaving this world, you need to be peaceful, knowing you made a difference and you helped others. And I knew from that moment that was going to be very important to me. And so, yeah, that was the key episode. So horrendous as it was, and Russell and Karen let me stay in their flat in Hong Kong after the event, and I was really struggling with the trauma of it all. So much as it was extremely awful to go through, it profoundly changed me in a way which ultimately has led to the charity, meeting you, being here. So in a way, I'm curiously grateful for it, actually.
Emma, talk to us about how you came to be in Bhutan and what happened there and the start of that journey.
So, yeah, now I've had the privilege of spending a huge amount of time in Bhutan. I've lived in Bhutan, and I've lived in monastic settings in Bhutan. And, you know, I've travelled all over the country, etc., etc. So I'm very lucky in that way. Often I talk to people and they'll say, yeah, you know, I always wanted to go to Bhutan. It's like a special place. And it was the same for me. I always wanted to go to Bhutan. From when I was quite a young child, I talked about it. But it was quite hard to know how to get there. You know, it wasn't an easy place to get to, you know. And I finally got the opportunity in 2011. And there was my first trip to Bhutan, and on that trip, I met this person who I felt a very profound connection to, and he became my teacher, and kind of, you know, the rest is history, so to speak. Bhutan for me is somewhere where auspicious coincidences, or we have this sense, tendril, auspicious conditions arise very easily for me in Bhutan. It's just one of those places where kind of conditions just ripen somehow for me in Bhutan. From the first time, from the first trip, that's been the case, and it's been the case since, And I feel like when I'm in Bhutan, I'm like plugged into my mainframe, I just feel like, you've turned all the lights on in the Christmas tree, And so, and it all started from that 2011 trip,
Which is a lovely on-ramp to talking about Bhutan.
Yes, yeah.
Please tell us a little bit about, I've never been there, but I imagine many others might not have been as well.
Yeah.
Sophie
has. Yeah.
How many people have been to Bhutan?
Oh, a few, yeah. Brilliant. Excellent. Okay, not enough.
So please chime in with your experiences too.
Yeah.
But Emma, maybe you can paint a picture of the socio-economic backdrop and the backdrop to the emergence of the idea of gross national happiness. Why did it emerge in Bhutan and against what backdrop?
Okay, so maybe I'll start with that then. I'll start with the emergence of gross national happiness in Bhutan, I think, because that's kind of going back in time. So Bhutan is a Buddhist country, and it has been a Buddhist country for centuries. So on a spiritual level, it is very ripe to thinking, what is an enlightened being? It's a Buddhist, from Buddhist, you want to become an enlightened being. And so you've got that very positive, really, backdrop of the possibility of humans, of a human and of humans working together. I have to be careful here because I'm not, I don't know a lot about Christianity, but it seems quite tough, Christianity, to me. It's probably not, it's probably lovely, but I know there's original sin, which seems quite a bit of a downer from a Buddhist point of view, because Buddhism is sort of inherently positive, really, about the possibilities. So I think there's just a kind of framework there of positivity around the possibilities of humans, and the possibility of harmony, and the possibility of kindness, and all these kind of qualities, right? And that's, that's really guided a lot of the country in a spiritual way, in a monastic way. But by the early 70s, the questions arose more about how do we put those ideas into a way of developing the society, right? And the way gross national happiness arose as an idea was that the fourth king, who's still alive in Bhutan today, the fourth king, very, very smart person, and a very profound Buddhist practitioner himself, he was invited to a conference in Sri Lanka in 1971, 1972, and it was a conference of Southeast Asian nations. And at that time, Bhutan had the smallest GDP of any of those Southeast Asian nations. And they kind of challenged him on it in a way to kind of embarrass him about the level of economic development in Bhutan. And he just shot back off the cuff, unplanned, and said, well, we're not interested in GDP, we're interested in GNH, gross national happiness. And so it had obviously been, in his mind, but it wasn't a pre-planned thing. It was a response to this sense that you guys aren't doing very well. Your GDP is not very good. And so that's how the idea arose. I did, when we look further back in time, and we look at the development of Bhutan, I did want to share with you one quote from the, I've cut my hand, from the 18th century Bhutanese legal code that was in place in Bhutan. It says, if the government cannot create happiness for its people, there is no purpose for the government to exist. So I would say that even before the fourth king, we get this sense that achieving happiness, not simply economic development, was always there in the culture, coming from that Buddhist background, I think. Yeah.
So, sorry.
And so then the king came back, and you've got to remember at that point there's not a democracy in Bhutan. So the king was very powerful in Bhutan and had various advisors and ministers which he appointed. And they began to work on this question of, okay, it's a lovely idea, it's a great brand, gross national happiness, brilliant brand name, but what exactly does it mean? And how might we develop the indicators that lie beneath it, that explain it? And Jigme Tinley, who went on to become the first ever democratically elected Prime Minister of Bhutan from Pema in the east, he did a lot of work for the king on developing the 4 pillars and the 9 indicators of happiness, which then was filled out into a sort of tangible thing.
And the development of those pillars and the indicators, what was that a simple exercise, because some of the precedents or thought about what happiness meant was already imbued in the sort of social context and the cultural context? Or how did they arrive at those things? And can you give us a sense of what they are?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I kind of look at them and, sometimes I feel like they kind of miss the point a bit when it comes to Bhutan, but I probably shouldn't say that. So, interestingly enough, actually, when we look at the levels of happiness in Bhutan according to GNH, right, according to those indicators, they're not that happy. When we use those indicators, it comes out about 50-50 in Bhutan, people saying they're happy or not so happy, right? And I'll talk about some of the problems with the methodology anyway. Which is quite shocking for a country which has branded itself as, the place of happiness, right? Although it stopped that brand about a year ago. But I'll talk about that a bit later. And yet, there is a great feeling of contentment around people in Bhutan, I think, when you talk to them, etc. So it's kind of strange, because I think, like for me, a lot of the reasons that I see, having been in the country for so long, about why people are content, actually aren't in the methodology. So why do I think people are content in Bhutan? I think because they've profoundly realized impermanence. They prepare for death from a very early age. They practice interdependence rather than very self-orientated thinking. They have this incredibly strong community structure. And they practice patience and acceptance because they believe in rebirth and karma. Things arising from karma, and you're laying down karma. I think all of these things actually make them extremely content people, and very resilient, very mentally resilient. But those indicators aren't in the gross national happiness model, really. So it's kind of strange, because I think if they use those indicators, or a bit more of, the sort of the mindset from Buddhism that leads to mental contentment, they would really find better results. The indicators that they chose to look at, 2 of them are forward-thinking, 2 of them are preserving thinking. So good governance, sustainable socio-economic development, those are things of change. And then the other 2 main pillars are ecological or environmental conservation, so keeping things as they are, and then cultural preservation, which is keeping things as they are. So those are the 4 main areas that they chose to identify and then break up underneath.
And you mentioned that you think that there were some problems with the methodology. Is that what you're talking about here, or
well, let's
were
think
there
about
other
this.
things?
Let's think about this. I mean, we all know how hard it is to specify what makes somebody happy and then to measure it, right? It's really difficult. I mean, some factors can be quantitative, like, how many families have electricity, or, something like that, how many children go to school or something. But lots of the indicators are far more subjective and fuzzy than that. That means that a lot of the data for studying gross national happiness in Bhutan comes from one-to-one interviews with people. Yeah? Now, GNH is a vision from the fourth king, which Bhutan is famous for. It's like the identity of the country. A lot of people won't want to criticize it or give a negative account of it because it's like criticizing the vision of the fourth king. So when you've got a system which is highly dependent on subjective interviews, I think you might have some issues with the methodology. So I think we have to bear that in mind. It doesn't mean that, but it's a general problem. It's a general problem. In all of these happiness indices, you ask somebody like, how much do you trust the government? How much do you, feel your well-being is being looked after? How blah, blah, blah. These are all subjective things. Right? It's very hard to quantify them. So that generally when we look at happiness indices, we've got this methodological problem. Yeah. But I think in Bhutan it's a particular thing because it's so close to His Majesty and the identity of the country itself.
Yes, and I'm imagining oftentimes if you ask the question, people can say whether they feel happy or not without necessarily being able to say why.
Why? And there's, of course, all of us, or sometimes we may feel unhappy and we don't know why either, right? Actually, to be frank, it works the other way around too.
You alluded to, Sophie.
Present king about gross national happiness.
Yeah.
Do you think things will change when the previous king has died?
Yeah, so brilliant question. In case you didn't hear it, Sophie was just asking what the present king thinks of gross national happiness. And obviously I don't have a sort of, intimate email relationship with the current king. And whether it will diminish when the fourth king is no longer around. Yeah. So I'll skip ahead, as we said we'd do. We're sort of jamming here. So the emphasis on gross national happiness has seriously declined in Bhutan in the last couple of years. And the happiness is a place brand, which was used to advertise Bhutan, has been replaced now. It's gone. So Bhutan's in a very interesting place. It had an extremely difficult experience of COVID, and it's had significant migration out of the country by young people. So Bhutan is definitely at a place where economic pragmatism has hit and is hitting big right now. So the GNH ministry has been closed. So previously, when decisions were made, they had to go through the GNH ministry to get approved, any big government decision. So in that way, GNH was not just talk, it was actually part of the government, method of making decisions in the government, But now, and then with the new Prime Minister, Seren Tobgay, economic pragmatism has definitely taken over. And I kind of think that makes actually quite a lot of sense for Bhutan at this point. On the other hand, the fifth king has had his own vision of how to bring these GNH principles into the next century. And so the current king is making huge efforts to build what's called a mindfulness city in Bhutan. You may have heard of it when you were there, right? In the southern part of Bhutan, there's a city called Gellifu, and it's on the Indian border. And His Majesty has created these extraordinary plans to create this mindfulness city, which is powered by alternative energy and is going to be this very kind of wonderful well-being place to live. So I think if you look at the literature that's come from the fifth king, he will make reference to the G&H vision of his father in this current project. That will be a defined economic zone in Bhutan. And it will have its own currency, which will be a cryptocurrency, interestingly enough. And it will have its own laws. It'll have its own legal system. It'll have its own visa policy. So it really will be like a state within a state. And that, I think, is where those ideas are really going to remain. And I think economic pragmatism will really reign in the rest of Bhutan for the next few years. That part is not fully explained at this point. And it's an interesting question, Sophie. Yes. I mean, we're talking a 20-year vision. So I think there's a lot still being worked out. And, because Bhutanese currency is non-convertible, the Nutram is non-convertible, it's a nightmare for foreign investors. Extremely difficult to support the Bhutanese economy with foreign investors with a non-convertible currency, right? So this mindfulness city is really going to be seeking foreign investment and to come into that special economic zone, take advantage of a cryptocurrency and all the facilities, the connection to India, blah, 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 to create a sort of economic hub in Bhutan. I've forgotten what your question was now. Did I answer it?
Yeah, well, it was just where it was going to be governed from.
That's right, yeah.
We have a microphone.
Oh, yes.
Silly question. Ask any more questions.
Did everyone hear the question?
Where's it going to be governed from? The mindfulness city. I said that's not quite clear right now. So it's a really, really good question. So I think we'll wait and see. Obviously, Bhutan now is a democracy with a very influential king.
Please.
Is it the same? Sorry, I can speak quite loudly actually. Is it the same reverence for the royal family that you have in other Asian countries, like in Thailand? There's a great, it's a bit
I think
changed a bit with time, but there's a great reverence for the royal family.
I think it is quite similar. Bear in mind that the Bhutanese population is around 700,000 people, right? It's not a lot. So you have this curious situation of the great reverence for the royal family, and then somebody going, "Yeah, the king was in the same class at me at school," because there's just not many people, right? And the royal family is quite extensive in number, because the fourth king had 4 wives. The fourth king married 4 sisters of the same family. It doesn't normally happen. But in this case, it did for very particular reasons. Now, when you get a fourth king with 4 wives, all of whom have children, you end up with a very enormous royal family. So, I was saying Lindsay's coming to Bhutan with me in September, and I was saying there's a pretty high chance we'll run into somebody from the royal family in September, because there's a lot of them around, and they're lovely, and they do lots of good things, etc. They're definitely held in respect. There's not the same law that there is in Thailand, but there is a slightly similar one. Placed in 1992, where it is not allowed to criticize the monarchy or the political system.
That's interesting. I wanted to ask whether the creation of this particular city, where suddenly the ideas retreated to a small place with all its own rules, it sounds almost quite insular.
Well, I think, yes, interesting point. Yeah, what were you going to say?
But I was going to ask, if, and democracy's young in the country, To what extent is there more participation because it's a smaller, more manageable space, or do these patterns of repression and unwillingness to speak out and unwillingness to criticize the royal family, do these things simply persist, or is it a more participatory model? Do people get involved in determining the direction of this city?
So, I mean, Bhutan is a democracy. We shouldn't be confused about that. But I think people have a loyalty, and they don't speak out and criticize like here. I mean, we spend all our time criticizing everybody, really, don't we? We really like criticizing people in this country. Politicians, royal family, football coaches, anyone you see, people want to criticize, right? So the culture of criticism is just not as endemic there, I would say. So I was just thinking about that for a minute.
Yeah, I'm just wondering to what extent the failure of, well, if we can call it a failure, but the failure of the project at a national level has something to do with the lack of participation and say about what happiness might mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think within Bhutan, the GNH has had some good results. I think, though, that often I feel that the vision of GNH has actually been more beneficial to the outside world. And, you know, the Bhutanese example has been, was very inspirational for the UN General Assembly when they brought in their criteria for sustainable development, etc. And it's had a big impact on other countries. I feel like it's been, in a way, more a gift to the world than to Bhutan. I wouldn't want to say it's a failure, especially on a live stream.
It's okay, I said it.
Okay, good. But I think it was hard to put into practice. I think you're weighing up all these factors, like in the GNH ministry, they're weighing up all these factors. And somebody ultimately has to say, yes, that project can go ahead or not, based on the GNH matrix, you know. So there was a lot of individual decision-making, I believe, in terms of the projects that got thumbs up or thumbs down. I think that became a bit complicated. So I think, that was part of the reason why it was also started to sort of be pulled back a bit.
So was that stifling? Was it stifling enterprise, new ideas emerging?
Not GNH.
No.
I mean, Bhutan, as you noticed, one of the 4 pillars was a cultural preservation, right? That was basically how you do stuff. Let's preserve how we do stuff. Let's preserve how we do stuff is not likely to lead to a highly entrepreneurial, groundbreaking situation.
But then there's a swing to economic pragmatism, which is almost an acceptance that there was something missing from that recipe, if you like.
Yes, I think, probably the feeling that if you from day one try to bring these elements into development alongside each other, it's quite difficult in a developing country where a significant amount of people live under the poverty line, and they want to eat, and they want to have a road, and they want to be able to get to hospital. Not having those basic needs prioritised, which doesn't happen in the GNH model. They can't be prioritised. It's about balancing all these things up. I think it was a bit tricky in certain areas of Bhutan.
Was there a question at the back? No.
I think it might have been like a seagull or something outside wanting to get involved.
And so I just wonder, would your reflection, the challenges were perhaps a failure of, not a failure, but difficulties with definition or difficulties with implementation? Is it a great idea that if it were tweaked could potentially work?
I mean, I'm not an expert on this subject. I'm mainly an expert on Buddhist philosophy, if anybody wants to ask me a question around that area. we're back in, back when we used to do sort of investment models, we would weight our factors, wouldn't we? We'd weight them, give them different weightings. I think you would have to re-weight the factors more in line with economic development. I think if you re-weighted it, it would be fine, or more practically applicable, to the development stage of Bhutan. Yeah.
And so how do local people, and I know there'll be a huge diversity of opinion and views if you could actually get them out of people, but how do people reflect on the whole project now?
G&H?
Yes.
Well, privately, people mainly laugh about it, but publicly, they would never criticise it. I think they're very proud of their fourth king. I think they're very proud of the vision. But in terms of its application in Bhutan, I think they think it's a little strange. And I just had this chat with a Bhutanese person recently, and I just said, "What do you think of the whole G&H thing?" And they just said, "If you've got food to eat, you're happy. If you haven't, you're not. That's G&H." I was like, "Okay, this is pretty simple." I think they just go with it. As I say, Bhutanese are very accepting. They kind of go with it, and I think the focus now very much is on the mindfulness city and how that's going to work and how that's going to be funded, and whether there's going to be jobs for Bhutanese people there and great opportunities, etc., etc. I think that's really the focus now. You hear it in Bhutan all the time at the moment: Gelufru mindfulness city, Gelufru mindfulness city, Gelufru mindfulness city. Yeah.
And sorry, please.
It's 40 years since I was in Bhutan.
Oh, wonderful.
So I think it's fair to say I recognise it's changed a wee bit.
Yeah.
I just wonder what the Bhutanese think the purpose is of moving to an economically focused country.
The purpose.
In other words, purpose, yes. What is it expected to deliver? Because what I'm hearing, I suggest, is by creating an economic zone within which the change is essentially constrained, you are creating barriers with the majority of the country, which I suspect, however you define gross national happiness, is likely to take you to a position where it is reduced. And I just wonder, why do they want to do it?
What was reduced? What's reduced?
Gross national
Gross
happiness
national
is
happiness.
reduced.
Okay. Oh, a few can of worms coming out in my mind now. Yes. I mean, I wouldn't want to run the economy of Bhutan at all. You've got 750,000 people. Until half a minute ago, most of them were farmers or monks. You've got China above you. You've got India below you. You're a landlocked country. You've never really made anything. That's a difficult economy to get right. You're never going to have a great domestic market. How do you develop a middle class without a great domestic market? I mean, it's a heck of an economy to try and, sort out, to be frank. So, when I look at it, I just don't want the job. I don't know what decisions I would have made, but I don't want the job. And I think His Majesty has recognised a lot of the structural impediments of the existing socio-economic situation and just decided to, leap into this other area. Now, the question of how it directly benefits the main mass of Bhutan that's left, I think it's definitely something that people are talking about and they're not sure about. And we're just going to have to see. Unless you invite His Majesty here to the Library of Mistakes sometime soon, then I can't, I can't speak for how that's going to work.
I've spoken to Charles Windsor on this a number of occasions.
Good, yes.
And he's a great fan of gross national happiness. And if you invited him to Bhutan, I suspect he would
go. Yeah. I have had a private audience with His Majesty on this subject, But I don't want to break the confidential conversation that I had with him. So, yeah.
There was another part of the question there which was interesting, I think. What do people expect they might receive from economic pragmatism? What's the attitude towards it? Do people embrace it, or do they say, well, we can actually manage the hazards that come with this because we've got strong cultural fabric? Or do they see that it might lead to greater inequality? Or how do people think about it?
Yeah, so I think it was really interesting because when I first started going to Bhutan in the earlier days, everybody talked about youth unemployment, right? It was a huge issue, especially in Thimphu. You have a lot, like in most developing countries, you get a lot of rural to urban migration in the end. People going to the cities sort of Dick Whittington style, you know, and so you had, particularly in the capital, you had like 15 to 18% youth unemployment. Because Bhutan put gradually into place as secular education came in, government-funded education came in, you know, they got a very well-educated population, right? But there was a big disjunction between the degree of education and the jobs available, right? So you've got this very high level of youth unemployment, which really worried people. And then you had this really difficult COVID, and then you had a significant number of well-educated young people leaving Bhutan to seek education and employment in other countries, particularly Australia and the Middle East. And so now you don't have any youth unemployment because they've all gone to other countries. Obviously, why are people going? You know, why are people going? They're going to improve their quality of their life. They're going to, you know, send back money back home so their mother can get a washing machine or whatever it is, right? They're going for economic reasons. You know, it's not they don't like Bhutan or don't think it's beautiful to be in the Himalayas. They're going for economic reasons. So I think that, and I think that's been a real shock to the system in Bhutan. So I think they feel they have to improve the economic outlook in Bhutan for people because, you know, people are voting with their feet. Yeah.
It's fascinating because it seems that we're sort of converging on the idea that the problem was not enough economic development, however you define that.
Yeah.
It might be growth. Now we get economic pragmatism. I wonder if we could flip things around and talk about the challenge that we face in the West and drawing on your understanding of Buddhist philosophy and this experience and experiment that's taken place. Because it feels as if Bhutan has gifted something to the world, which is an idea, and it's an idea that's been picked up, you know, by people like Kate Raworth, the city of Amsterdam. It's being tried in different places, or at least the principles are. And interestingly, it's an idea that's always pitched against growth. You know, we end up with this sort of polarization. Either it's growth or it's happiness, and somehow we seem to battle to escape that very sort of polarized debate.
Which is stupid, isn't it? I mean, I heard a couple of people going, that's a stupid thing. Polarizing those two is a stupid thing. So I think we will have to recognize that's a stupid thing. Isn't it? Yeah, okay, just checking. Yeah.
I think so, but I mean, it's interesting if the classical economists might not argue.
Yeah, maybe not, if there's a classical economist who wants to argue against that. Yeah, okay.
So the question comes, is this all just a matter of finding a balance?
I mean, it depends the perspective you're coming from. Obviously, from a Buddhist point of view, you know, because we're talking about worldly happiness here, right? We're talking about happiness which is determined by your external conditions, you know. So obviously from a Buddhist point of view, you cultivate mental contentment. And you don't stop cultivating mental contentment, whatever the circumstances. Yeah. I can't remember why I said that now, but I just
Would
felt the
that
need
not be
to,
a
I just felt the
would
need
that
to
not
put
be
that in there.
would
you
that
know.
not be a universal point of view? I mean, the difficulty in advanced Western economies, if we can call them that, is that people have had growth. You know, gross national income has attained a certain level.
Yeah. Which they thought was going to bring them happiness.
Happiness.
Yeah.
So people have become wealthier, they've become healthier, better educated, and hey presto, we're not happy.
Yeah, but that's because their happiness was contingent on all those external factors, right? They didn't develop any mental contentment along the way. They developed a mind like that, right?
Yeah.
And then the mind got all of that, and then it went. And then they went, let's go to Bhutan. Yeah. Then they went, let's go to Bhutan, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, I always think it's interesting, you know, you use the word contentment. It has a very different feeling from the word happiness, I think. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, the definitional problem is a big one. If you ask people if they feel happy, you know, they might say, well, in this moment I feel happy. If you ask them if they have a sense of well-being, they might think about the question differently, because well-being suggests, do I feel well in a more sort of permanent sense, I think.
I don't know. I like contentment. Contentment's the word that Nagarjuna uses in his text, and I think it's a good one. He says the greatest riches to have is mental contentment. So I think we need some of that economic development. Obviously, you know, we definitely do. But at some point, we need to know what's enough. Each of us need to decide what's enough to say, right now I'm content, and what platform does that contentment enable me to do in this world, you know? So I like the diving board of contentment. From reaching contentment, what can you dive then into, you know, idea? But you know, we do need obviously decent economic. You know, you need electricity and shelter and you know, dum-de-dum-de-dum-de-dum.
And we need all those things that sit at the top of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a sense of connection, belonging, all of those things, which I'm sure resonate in different ways in Buddhist thought and so on.
Yeah, I mean, Maslow's hierarchy, I'm sure everybody knows. Does everybody know Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Like, yeah, I've totally done that. You don't know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay. But remember that the top part, the fifth little triangle top of self-actualization at the top of Maslow's model, he only ever thought 5% of people were going to get there. You know, so when you look at it, yes, it's a stage-by-stage experience of satisfying your needs. And he said, you know, when your first level is satisfied, or in a way you're content, you can go to the next one, right? But when you look at the numbers, fewer and fewer and fewer people get up the top, right? Because if you don't establish a feeling of mental contentment with one layer, you won't move to the next. You'll stay wanting more in that same space. You know, so if you really think that happiness comes from having, you know, shelter, it does. But if you stay there and you think, actually, happiness comes from having 2 shelters, or maybe how about 3? That's 3 with a built-on garage and a swimming pool and a whatever, right? You're stuck. You haven't established the mental state of contentment from that activity, and that's why not everybody moves up.
I think we've got 2 questions. I think the first one was yes. So if you don't mind, we'll start.
Yeah, you can hear me. So I want to ask something else, but now we've moved on, so I'm going to say what I want to say.
Yeah, go.
And then I'll ask the first. So I think it's very important to start from language in all these huge debates, because language is the first thing we think through and we understand the world. So I think we need to understand first what has hit us in the West, and to name it and to understand deeply. So that's
Can I just, hold on a sec, can I just check? I just want to check, need to check your assumption there. So your assumption was that the first thing that we, in terms of how we connect to the world, is through language. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so we need to give correct definitions to ourselves and to our people.
Okay, so the first way we connect with the world is through our perception.
So
it's not through our language. It has to be from the mind.
From the mind, but we need to define after the perception
but it's from
what
perception
this is.
first.
So we need to understand what neoliberalism is, what is psychology, what is happiness. I'm a psychologist with a niche interest in eudaimonia and happiness, so I'm very fond about, my dissertation was on that. But it's sad to hear that places like Bhutan that have a completely different perspective, and Buddhism is a very core way of living, have to jump on the neoliberal train, even at the tail of it, to develop economically.
What is the neoliberal train? So I'm not sure what that means.
I'm using a metaphor of a train that is neoliberal and the markets drive it. And unfortunately, places that are guided by other principles have to follow.
Oh, you mean like a planned economy
globalized.
versus a neoliberal?
The neoliberal economy versus a state like Bhutan that is interested in the national happiness and has a ministry of happiness, you know. So I think it's very important to start, even if it's the second stage, from the language, so that everybody understands what's happening to us in our everyday life, to then make informed choices.
Okay, so I don't think I said that Bhutan was joining a neoliberal economy. Bhutan has a 5-year planned economic plans. They have 5-year economic plans, right? Which sounds very much like something you might find in Singapore, or even like, you know, very state-orientated.
You said they're interested in international investment in the new city, right?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
That's what I'm trying to say. That anyway, that's just a thought. The question.
No, but let's stay here, because you're making 2 + 2 = 5, which feels not quite right for me in Bhutan. So are you saying that Bhutan should not have international investment in it?
No, I'm saying that I'm observing it as a phenomenon where a smaller nation that has a very different culture to what we believe in Edinburgh, right, or in London City, is forced economically to take in some principles that are financial that they wouldn't otherwise do if they had, you know, as you said, food on the table. My question, though, the original, and then we can jump back to it, is what are the criteria for the new population that is going to be there? Like, which people, what number of people are going to move to that city? Do you know
all of this, I don't know. I mean, it's really early days, right? It's a vision. It's a vision. And no, it's not being forced on them.
No, I didn't say that.
You know,
these know the criteria.
Yeah, but the economic pragmatism has not been forced on them. I mean, they have a very difficult job of how to manage a country in these conditions when nearly 70,000 Bhutanese have left. You know, they have to get real, right? Nobody's forced it on them. They've genuinely tried to work out how to tackle this problem. Nobody's forced it on them at all. So, you know, this is democracy, and they have a democratically elected prime minister, and they've tried their best to work out how on earth do we give our population a decent standard of living, and keep our population happy and in the country. I mean, nobody's forced anything on them. I think it's really, we shouldn't think that. I don't know, I'm sorry if I gave that impression, you know.
No, I think you misunderstood me. I didn't see that somebody has forced them. I'm talking about concepts here, like forced by a situation that is globalized, like markets ruling what we do and how much we think, you know, our happiness depends on the garage and the third car. I'm not saying that a king or a state has forced anybody. I'm just saying how things change because, you know, basic needs in Maslow's hierarchy, things are not met. And I would like to see nations put everything through a ministry of happiness first. That's what I'm trying to say. And the other question about the population is merely a psychological research question. Like, are people going to easily move there if they want to? Is somebody going to control the criteria? This is very...
yeah, I mean, as I say, you know, I think we have to be really careful, right? I mean, I think we have to let these countries make those decisions. You know, if you go to somebody in East Bhutan and you say, you know, I know you want, I don't know what you want a washing machine, but everything has to go through G&H ministry. I mean, we can't tell a country to do that. You know, it's really, you know, it's like old school colonialism, to be frank. You know, so it's really up to them and nothing's being forced on them. And you know, I'm sorry you think it's sad it's not going through G&H ministry anymore, but in terms of His Majesty's plans for the Mindfulness City, they're very early days, and a lot of the practicalities are not finalised yet. And I really wanted to bring it in to show that although G&H in some ways appears to have been, you know, definitely put on the back foot, some of that legacy in, as you say, in this very sort of specific physical area of Bhutan is definitely, you know, this is definitely a link there. And a more clear link to Buddhism, because the structure, the physical structure of the city is being built as a mandala, if people know mandalas. And there's going to be 3 or 4 Dharma centers and monasteries built there, which will allow international students to study Buddhism in Bhutan for the first time, because unlike a few very lucky people like me, it's been extremely hard for international people to study Buddhism in Bhutan. So that would be a great opportunity for Dharma students who are genuinely interested in Vajrayana Buddhism to study in Bhutan. So in a way, it's kind of it's definitely more Buddhist in a way, more clearly Buddhist than G&H was. Yeah.
We had another question over there.
You alluded earlier on to the pyramid of need, and I think a wee throwaway comment earlier on about if they've got enough to eat, that's happiness, and if they haven't, it's
that's
not.
That's what Bhutanese told me.
I think there's an awful lot of truth in that. I wonder if against the concept of gross national happiness, there's been any consideration of some kind of a universal basic income to ensure that people do have enough to eat.
There isn't right now. It's a really, really good point. Bhutan's economic income inequality figures are improving, but you will know yourself if you go to. I mean, not so know yourself, but the gentleman next to you, probably even he would have noticed that. You know, there have been significant issues with income inequality in Bhutan, and you know, because the West is much nearer to India. And the capital is in the West, and so you know the government is in the West. You know, there's also a big difference between the degree of economic development in the West versus the East. And they had this policy, Rising East or East Rising, to try and get rid of that big difference between West and East. You know, so you will see significant differences, and there isn't that kind of policy. I mean, I think it would be really good. I personally, if I was in charge of Bhutan, you know, I'd be doing a lot to sort out a tax system, and I'd be doing a lot to sort out the banking system. Those are 2 things I might do to help a better distribution and availability of capital to everybody in the country. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice idea, gross national happiness, but I'm wondering if it's really a relative rather than an absolute. I'm thinking of a isolated little village where everybody is totally content, by your definition, happy. And then all of a sudden travel becomes possible, and you discover this little other village just over the hill, same number of people, but they've got twice as much to eat, and the houses are nicer, and the kids are stronger. And all of a sudden they say, wow, I'm not so happy anymore. You know,
absolutely. Absolutely. That's why His Holiness the Dalai Lama, if you read his writings on happiness, he said, you know, comparison is the destroyer of contentment. Comparing what you have to others will, for your mental contentment, for the precious richness of mental contentment, it'll absolutely destroy it. And of course, you know, certainly in Bhutan, where mobile phones are absolutely endemic, Bhutan has the highest degree of iPhone ownership in Asia, and per head or whatever, you know, because it doesn't have fixed line phones that went straight to mobile. And, you know, I'm sure that social media has had a huge effect on people going, oh, you know, be like that, you know. So, I hear your point. But
so you can't divorce growth from happiness then?
Yeah. No, we're not divorcing it. We're not divorcing it. We're saying that if you put economic growth over here and happiness over here, it's bonkers, right? We're not divorcing it. It's essential in it. I don't think we divorced it, did we? No.
Well, I don't think we want to. But,
no, we don't. We definitely don't want to. But I would say that from a Buddhist point of view, a state of stable happiness or stable contentment is an extremely rare thing in this world. From a Buddhist point of view, we're all right now in a state of suffering. It's just a degree that differs. And so that in no way would even Bhutan say that in a worldly circumstance, there's some lovely village somewhere where everybody permanently, every day, whether it rains or suns, whether they've got, a happy marriage or an unhappy marriage, is in a state of contentment. Because we're in the worldly situation right now. We're not enlightened beings. We're obscured. And that's the teachings of Buddhism. So there really isn't that, valley in Bhutan. And I think we shouldn't burden ourselves with feeling as if that's how we should be, because while we're ordinary, unenlightened beings, we're just going to feel like we failed because we haven't achieved that la-la state all the time. So I'd probably put those ideas to one side, leave the valley.
That's been fascinating.
I feel like we had another question down here. Yeah.
What's that?
Oh, another one here. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's only when the mic comes to you.
I feel like my question's probably already been answered, but I think just to add a comment, I think Finland, which is where I'm from, has been voted.
Yeah, you do brilliantly. You do brilliantly. Yeah.
Now, in my experience, we're probably quite, just stoical, and we're probably more content than happy, right? We're happy with what we have, and I think that comes from our history, our recent history. But I think one of the things, having lived in Pakistan, having lived here, having lived in Finland, is that the society is very equal. It's quite rich, but it's also quite equal. And I think that is the thing that creates that happiness. And I was going to ask you about equality in Bhutan, but I think you've already answered that.
Yeah, so when you look at the Scandinavian Happiness Index, when you look at their definition of the economic part of their definition, low income inequality is in there, and it's not in the Bhutanese index. So there are significant differences in the indicators used in the Scandinavian model to the Bhutanese model. Very significant differences. And of course, your model produces much higher levels of happiness on paper, So, but I do find those differences very interesting.
I think one of the other ones is trust in government.
Trust in government is very much higher. Yeah. And, that's a tricky area for Bhutan, because Bhutan has gone from a monarchy into a democracy. And so, that's an interesting, but they still have an active monarchy. So they, have those two things there. So who do you trust? Do you trust the monarchy? Do you trust the government? Are they together? Are they different? That's as hard a thing in Bhutan.
And we're a very young democracy, right? So
very young. Yeah, very young.
Proud of the independence, so I think that probably goes into it.
In Finland?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you only came in 1917, isn't it? Your country started in 1917. Yeah, and you never had a monarchy, which is extraordinary. There aren't many countries in the world that say that. Yeah, exactly, yeah, ruled by Russia and ruled by Swedes, right? The Swedes, yeah. Anyway, fascinating.
We have another question.
Jonathan.
Emma, I was just going to say, you've possibly in the Buddhist community in Bhutan, you've had an almost unique experience of having a foot in the camp of Mammon and in the camp of Buddha. How influential do you think the Buddhist Bhutanese and external Buddhist diaspora has, the establishment, the religious establishment, has on the dynamics of this debate, and how influential is the religious establishment still in Bhutan in shaping this debate?
As I said at the beginning, I think that Bhutanese actually are very content, and the reason they're very content comes from the Buddhist teachings on impermanence, on death, on rebirth, on karma, none of which are in the indicators. So I think they're very influential in really creating mental contentment and perspective, you know, in the Bhutanese population in a more profound way than I think the indicators of GNH do.
But do Buddhist practitioners feel that as the dynamic of this debate in greater favour of more conventional measures of economic growth, is there a feeling in the religious community that something might be lost as a result of doing that?
Something might be lost from doing what?
From concentrating more on more conventional measures of economic growth, say.
Economic pragmatism. Will something be lost because of economic pragmatism?
I just think, you know, from a monastic perspective, you know, this is all worldly stuff that's going quite well or not so well or a bit better or a bit bad again. It's just a very different thing, right? So training your mind in contentment and, you know, and not training your mind to be non-attached, not angry, not harming. You know, those are the real origins of happiness from a Buddhist perspective, right? So all of these indicators, they're all very worldly anyway, to be frank. They all still say the level of your happiness depends on all these outer stuff, right? So it's just a different perspective. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah.
I think we've got one more.
Okay.
How's the audience feeling? Should we carry on taking
exhausted.
questions?
They're feeling exhausted. Ready to buy the book. That's how they're feeling. Yeah.
Okay, let's go for one more.
It's a lighter question,
Yeah.
I believe. I'd be really interested, Pema, from all the time you've spent in Bhutan and engaging with the people there and the culture, what would be your wish of those things that you see contentment bringing back to us in the West?
Oh, okay.
That's a nice question.
Well, I mean, a lot of people used to say to me, "Oh my goodness, you know, how do you fit back into the West after you've been in Bhutan? It must be like such a shock. You know, you must go through culture shock. You know, how do you do it?" And I think in the early days it was a bit, to be frank. But then I started to appreciate what I have here so much more. Like, I never want to go to a dentist in Bhutan, you know. And so I started to see Bhutan more clearly and really appreciate these extraordinary things that it has. But I also realized the extraordinary things that are here too. And not just material things, not just the dentist or street lighting, but also, you know, actually, our culture is actually extremely kind culture. We don't seem to go on about it very much. But I have found incredible kind people in the West, in our country, that are very open and they're very interested to learn and to contribute. I mean, Bhutan, you know, was cut off to the world, and you know, until very recently. Bhutan has a very strong sense of being Bhutanese or not Bhutanese, and you know, whereas, you know, if you're in Europe, like, it's, you know, people have, you know, moved boundaries, moved countries, and moved people here. So there's people here from all kinds of countries, Poland and I don't know what, you know. So we have that feeling of interconnectedness and globalness, or helping each other in much wider ways, I think. And I really realized that from, you know, so I sort of just ended up appreciating both, rather than kind of going, okay, I love it there, I hate it here, you know. Often we kind of put ourselves down, I notice, in the West. You know, we really beat ourselves up. We think we're all kind of greedy, materialistic, unkind people, right? And everybody in the East is like kind and lovely and you know, not greedy. It's just bonkers. You know, it's just bonkers. And I think often we don't see ourselves clearly enough in the West, in terms of, you know, our kindness, our openness, transparency, our forthrightness. These are a lot of qualities that I see sometimes more clearly here than there, right? So, yeah. So, and I want to say that, you know, a lot of obviously, you know, today I've spoken from the perspective of GNH and talking about the country of Bhutan from that. But obviously I am very informed by founding a charity for special needs children in Bhutan, where I've seen great difficulty. I've seen children living in very difficult circumstances. And part of my wish to help the country and to maybe emphasize that some economic pragmatism makes sense is because, you know, I've seen some of the difficult situations in rural areas, and I wouldn't want that on anyone. Yeah. So that has also informed some of my opinions and thoughts today. Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about your charity.
Just quickly, I mean, the book ends with the founding of the charity, so you'll see the reason why in there, etc. And yeah, I think as I said at the beginning, you know, when I realized that I wanted to contribute something in this world at the time of being held hostage, obviously I had no idea what that might be. I just had this feeling that I would want to, right? And then circumstances came along where, you know, I just had that chance to make a difference, and I decided I would. And yeah, so I've definitely, you know, I feel like it does hark back to that hotel room, and I'm pleased. You know, I've raised nearly £700,000 now, and not one penny is wasted. In fact, as Jonathan and Angus know, I can be too critical of other charities in Bhutan for their more liberal way of dealing with donations. So yeah, we've built the first purpose-built special needs school in the whole of Bhutan. It's huge, and it's amazing. It's all fully wheelchair accessible, and yeah, I've done just lots in the education and medicine space in Bhutan. Because, you know, your money goes far in Bhutan, so you can get a lot done. You know, it's amazing what you can get done in Bhutan. And yeah, obviously there's always more to do. But I'm pleased I found the thing that I felt so strongly about that I had to act. You know, because there's all kinds of needs in this world, right? They're endless. You know, they're endless. And I think it's just really lucky if you find your thing that you think, here's where I'm going to make a difference, you know. So that's the charity.
That's a wonderful note to end on. Emma, thank you for sharing all your experiences and your insights.
Thank you.
There's so much to think about. I hope these conversations continue.
Yeah, I think
it's fascinating that with your great spiritual journey, you've ended up with a project which is so deeply pragmatic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And practical. And again, you know, this project needs money. So please buy the book, reach into your pockets, buy the book this evening.
Buy the book for any amount.
Yes.
Right? So I had somebody buy the book for £8,000.
Yeah. So it's,
I don't know, that made every page worth about 50 quid or something.
It's a very accessible starting price, but let's go beyond that.
Yeah.
and it is a UK registered charity.
Yeah, fully
so
UK registered.
People who want to donate through
kind of thing.
CAF or whatever other platforms it's possible to do
gift aid.
this.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. And
thank you, Emma.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for really getting into the spirit of the talk today and participating. And I really thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.